Hello and welcome. With drugs and violence out of control in Brazil's favelas, the government has taken decisive action by sending in security forces, raising the question, how does this contrast with the country's growth as an international powerhouse? Well, security forces stormed dozens of slums in the country's best-known city, Rio de Janeiro, in an effort to push out drug gangs holed up inside. The police say that they're now in control of most shanty towns after a series of operations in which a number of suspected drug traffickers were killed. Many believe it's part of an effort to clean up Rio's image before Brazil hosts the 2014 Football World Cup and the 2016 Summer Olympics, both events that are meant to showcase the nation's emergence as a growing global force. Brazil is already an economic giant, and its leaders believe it can become a key player in diffusing international tensions and forging new political alliances. So today we ask, as the balance of power shifts in today's world, how effectively can Brazil step into the role of a trusted global negotiator? Remember, you can email us or text us your questions and comments. Joining me now is Brazil's Foreign Minister, Celso Amorim, who's here in Washington, D.C., where he's being recognized by Foreign Policy magazine as one of its top 100 global thinkers. He's number 6 on that list. So it's good to have you on the show again.
Pleasure.
So you've got, obviously, a lot going on right now on the domestic front. I just want to ask you a little bit about the military and police force going into the Alemão. It looks like the police is in there for the long term. It's going to be there at least 7 months, well into next year. Is the police going to take over complete control? And what happens if you lose a lot of those the criminals and the criminal elements that you're trying to get hold of? What if they evade the police?
Well, I think in any case, the fact that they had to split and to become less articulate to one another is already a plus. Many of them were, of course, arrested, but even those who were able to run away will not have the same facility to articulate themselves into a more organized gang. And I think it was a very important move, very much welcome by the population of the favela itself, the community as we call it, and I think it was really very important for Rio de Janeiro.
Now, of course, you've used this tactic before, but this is the biggest sort of operation that you've done, I think.
Yes, and I think we are improving each time, but it's not only the military operation, but also the peaceful occupation with the people of the community, with the cultural centers, sports centers, and using their own organization. And really the people who feel free to go to work and come back. So and actually it happened with the minimum of victims, which I think it's
Is it going to be easy? Is it going to be easy, though, to win over the confidence of the people of the community of the favela, considering there's been issues with the police and corruption with the police before?
Well, I think they were very. I mean, I visited one of these favelas that had been recovered before. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, I can't be everywhere, but I visited together with President Lula one of these favelas before, which was totally dominated by drug trafficking, and I saw the people very, very happy. I mean, with the fact that they could work, they had these cultural centers, they were little children in an orchestra, there's not. I don't think this is a big problem because it's an integrated operation. It's not purely security. It's security plus other services that bring the people closer together.
Can you maintain it long term? Because I mean, the governor of Rio de Janeiro state has said that this was a result of long-term failed policy by the government, that this is an issue that has festered for a long time. Is it something that you can stabilize for the long term and avoid the gangs just coming back together again?
Well, I'm sure it has to be for the long term. Of course, it was more an absence of policy, a complacency, if you wish, with the situation of the inevitability. And I think now it really took great courage to go into these places and to reestablish peace and the normal way of life for the people. And I think it will be for the long run. But I think it will be easier in a way to stabilize than really to take these people away, because even because of the topography, this initial operation is very, very difficult.
A lot of people wonder why has it taken so long to act? Is it because of the impending World Cup coming up in 2014, the Olympic Games in 2016?
Well, I don't think so. Well, I think, of course, we have a big obligation towards the international community, not only for the World Cup but the Olympics, and I'm sure this also spurs the movement. But it started even before we knew that we would have certainly the Olympics, and I think it's an obligation. on the part of the federal authorities, but the state authorities and also municipal. And I think for a good coincidence now, we have good coordination between these three levels of governments, which helps very much because, you know, the security itself is, the task of the state authorities. But without the help of the federal authorities, which have the army and the armored cars and so on, it would be impossible. It was really this display of force, which maybe we learned also a little bit in other situations with peacekeeping operations that helped us to do that in the right way.
On to Cancun, of course, the climate talks there. There's a fear that they might just collapse like the Copenhagen talks, at least produce very little. What is the expectation from Brazil?
Well, I think the expectations in general are certainly lower than they were in Copenhagen. But that has also the bright side, if you wish, that the possibility of failure are smaller. So I believe it's possible to have results that will not be the big bargain that we are looking for in Cancun, but it still will be helpful in terms of forests. For instance, this RED program, which allows also to have compensation not only for reduction of emissions, but also for avoiding new emissions. And also in terms of a fund, we hope we'll be able to have it established for adaptation, which is very important for instance, for the small islands. I don't think we'll be able to come to the big agreement that was thought to have in Copenhagen, but maybe this will be the preparation for the future.
Well, Brazil is seen as a credible negotiator. Do you see a role for Brazil at Cancun to try and push things along at least?
Well, I think certainly Brazil is, above everything else, is leading by example, because we took the decision before Copenhagen actually, and we announced it in Copenhagen, to have a reduction of emissions in relation to the baseline of 36 to 39%. And irrespective of what others did, we enacted into law in Brazil. So we were not in this bargaining position to say, well, if you do that, I do that. And so we were not, as I used to say, we are not hiding behind anyone, and we will allow no one to hide behind Brazil.
It is a challenge, though, isn't it, Minister? Because you've described developed world countries as being hypocritical about the way they've approached climate change, and that you say that the developing countries should take a leading role. But it's a challenge for them. How do they achieve, climate control or climate measures without slowing down their growth? China and India, for example.
Well, I don't think it necessarily implies slowing down. It's a different kind of growth. Of course, each country will have its own needs, and I can't say that for everyone it will be the same. I'm, for instance, convinced that, for instance, if you have a greener economy, in the sense, not in a very poetical sense, but very concretely, for instance, if we use more resources for renewable forestry in our steel industry, in the end, the consumer also will have a preference for our products. We'll be able to put a stamp on it, a seal and a label, and that will help a lot. And the same thing goes to other products. So I don't think it is necessarily a liability. It can be also a plus. And that's what we're doing, for instance, with our ethanol. That's what we are doing with other products to give a label of ecological and social quality, so to say.
The last time we spoke, Minister, it was about Brazil's role with Turkey jointly in negotiating with Iran over its nuclear program. And I wonder how you can build on that, considering there's still widespread fear about Iran's ambitions, especially in light of the WikiLeaks cables.
Well, let us leave the WikiLeaks aside for a moment, and I would say, because I don't think they add much to what everyone knew already in any case. It's very exciting maybe, but not really interesting. I think what I have heard is that there is an interest in this P5+1 meeting with Iran. I think, in my opinion, they have to concentrate on a swap agreement. I mean, the uranium for light enriched uranium for the fuel. Whether it will be exactly what we put in our declaration, what it will add, we have to add something more. It's not for me to say now, but I'm sure that the path is the same that we followed, because if you deal with the question in a more general term, as usually seen, what are the Iranian intentions and so on, I don't think it will work. I mean, if I could say that, because it was not our creation, but the beauty of this agreement, it's because it's verifiable. It's quantity, place, and time. So these are three very physical things that you can see. It's not a question of judging intentions.
Now, I know you're saying let's ignore the WikiLeaks as far as certainly what was said with Iran, but if you look at overall what's happened, it's been quite damaging to America. Do you think it's changed the US's position in international eyes, having all this information come out? Is it long-term damage?
Maybe it's a question of the quantity, maybe is something new. In terms of quality, it has happened before. I mean, these CIA agents have written books and memoirs in which many things appeared, like assassination of Fidel Castro or whatever. Well, I think it's really a challenge for the United States to, and for other countries, by the way, to show that not only their ends are right, but the means that are being used are also right. But in the end, I think this will prevail. I don't think it's something that will stay for a long time.
There was one thing that did come up is Brazil and its counterterrorism plans, certainly when it comes to the Arab community in Brazil. And I wonder what, in the past, Brazil has distanced itself from any such ideas. How would you describe the current state of Brazil's approach to anti-terrorism?
Well, what we don't want is profiling terrorism and say the Arabs are more prone to terrorism than anyone else. I mean, by the way, one scientist was just killed in Iran. We don't know by whom. I mean, it's something, and another one was also in the car. So we are against terrorism, from wherever it comes. I don't think there is any evidence that there are Arab terrorists in Brazil, and very often there are accusations because people send money. Very often they are sending money to their families. This is a different matter. I mean, if they are doing it legally, and the families are there legally, well, it's very difficult for us to have absolute control. But I think it's very dangerous if you start profiling countries. I mean, Arabs or Arab descendants are more prone to be terrorists than other people. I don't think that's right. Then that would be counter our own culture.
We've got to pause here. We're going to take a short break. When we return, changing the equation. Could Brazil become the dominant power in Latin America as the influence of the United States declines? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Brazil was once known for its football success. It won the World Cup 5 times and produced the game's greatest player, Pelé. But today it has a new goal: to build a peaceful alliance with an emerging bloc of nations who want to break away from their dependence on traditional powers such as the USA. Well, my guest today is Brazil's Foreign Minister, Celso Amorim, who's also entering his final month in that job. Let's get back to some questions. Minister, now, I want to put an email to you that we received from one of our viewers here. It was Bashir Hama who wrote in saying, Brazil first needs to overcome its prolonged domestic problems such as drug gangs and poverty to gain global credibility. Now, I know you think of Brazil as a strong negotiating power, but when you look at the issues that you face at home, how can you reconcile that image of what's happening at home and what you'd like to achieve overseas?
This is like saying that the United States had to stop with Al Capone before becoming a world power. And I don't know, I don't think we have any Al Capone, by the way. Our problem is much smaller compared to what happened then. And we're dealing with that. And I don't think we have to deal simultaneously with our own problems and not wait for them to be completely solved before we act outside.
A couple of emails that referred to Brazil's international standing. I'll read two back to back. The first is from Finland, from Marina Laurenko, who wrote in saying, Brazil can be trusted as a global negotiator if it manages to keep out these Western lobbies, quote, led by the US and the EU against Iran, China and others in the East. And the second email from Qatar comes in from Isaka in Doha, who says Brazil has come of an age where it can play a role, whereby it can play a role of peacemaker by not letting countries like the US and EU to dictate its decisions. Now, I wonder, to be a credible peacemaker like that, is it purely to be a negotiator, or is Brazil really the main interest to get that UN Security Council seat?
Well, I think the reform of the Security Council is a necessity. It's not a necessity of Brazil, it's a necessity of the world, because you cannot leave the security of the world up to the 5 powers that were the victors, among the victors of the the Second World War. So this has nothing to do with Brazil necessarily, although Brazil, of course, has a claim to that, as India or South Africa and other countries may have. But I would say that our ability to negotiate has been amply displayed in areas like trade and in areas like climate, in which, as I mentioned before, in the case of climate, we have served even as a bridge very often. In the area of peace and security, the resistances are bigger because, of course, this is the core of the power. And of course, the countries that have the veto power now in the Security Council like to discuss among themselves. And this is very bad, I would say, not because Brazil is excluded, because it lends itself to a kind of bargaining that's not useful for the world. I mean, if you see what happened in the question of sanctions to Iran and see what the results are, you know, how can I understand that, for instance, Iran is forbidden to buy gasoline and at the same time it can have a nuclear plant? I mean, I'm not against the nuclear plant there, if provided it's for peaceful use, but you see the paradox in the reasoning.
Now, I have to ask you, I know you see or you champion the BRIC alliance, which is Brazil with Russia, India and China. To what degree do you feel it's a feasible counter to the strength of the US and its allies now?
Well, I mean, it's not a question of being counter someone or counter something, but it gives a better balance for the view of the world. I hope soon we'll have South Africa as part of this group as well, and suddenly the acronym, instead of being BRIC, will become BRICS, and also have a representation of the African continent. I think these countries are very important. They are already responsible for the greatest part of the growth. Of course, a lot is China, but of course, India, Brazil, South Africa are also, and Russia are also very important. And I think this leads to let us say, a diversification of perspectives, which is very necessary. And I think it has already shown itself in the discussions of the G20, but it can show in other fields as well.
Do you see it laying the foundations for a new non-aligned movement?
Well, I would not see necessarily that way. We took an initiative that very often is not mentioned, which is probably as important as the BRICS, and this was an alliance between India, Brazil, and South Africa, which are three big democracies, one in each continent of the developing world. And in a way, this is a mini non-aligned group which has a lot of, but it's also operational. Because of course the big numbers in non-aligned make it more difficult to be operational. And for instance, I give you an example. When we had a meeting of this group, which we call IBSA, recently in Brazil, the Palestinian minister asked to come to speak to this group. And again, when we were in the UN, Indonesia joined us and again asked for a meeting of the three plus Indonesia with Palestine. So it's a natural alliance which can play a very important role in several fields, including that of peace and security, including, for instance, the Middle East.
Now, President Lula has made a push in his time in office for international relations, to build relations also with countries such as Iran, Israel and North Korea. Is that an agenda his successor, Dilma Rousseff, is going to continue?
Well, I'm sure, you know, but just to say, I mean, either you want to be a global actor or you don't. I mean, if you don't want to be a global actor, fine, you just deal with your neighbors, maybe with one or two big powers. But if you want to be a global actor, you didn't mention the African countries, but it's a very important part of the Brazilian foreign policy. I'm sure President Dilma Rousseff will follow the same line, maybe with her own style. I don't know. This is, of course, very personal also, but I think the main lines will be followed. There's no reason to fear that it will be otherwise.
And of course, on some fronts, there's a desperate need for an outside force that perhaps has had no vested interest in the conflict before, and of course the Middle East peace, the Israeli-Palestinian situation. You mentioned the Palestinian spokesman coming to speak at that event. How much more of a role do you think Brazil could play in what seems to be a very stalemated environment in the Middle East there?
Well, I think we can help in the dialogue, you know, because we have the trust from different sides. I would say I cannot even say both sides, because it's not only two sides. But we have the trust of several sides. How many other countries in the world could receive in the same month the president of Israel, the president of the Palestinian Authority, and the president of Iran? Brazil can.
I want to put one email to you that we got. It's actually a second part from our viewer in Finland, from Marina Larenko, who wrote in saying, Brazil has massive human rights violations, but the international community does not seem interested in pointing fingers, maybe because Brazil poses no serious threat to any country. Your perspective on that?
Well, I don't agree with her. Of course, we have a human rights problem, but every country has. And I remember long ago when a minister of Germany, long ago, came to Brazil and said, now I have a delicate subject. I want to speak about human rights. I said, fine, you speak. And I want to speak too, because I want to speak about racism and immigration policies in Europe. We are open. We are one of the few countries who have an open invitation for all the rapporteurs of the United Nations to come at any time. And very often they say things that we don't like, but we try. I think this is a way of improving our situation. But what we don't like is a self-righteous position of some countries where violations do occur, very often with profiling, racist profiling, and then they see only the problem. It's much easier to see the problem in your neighbor than in yourself.
Now, of course, Brazil has had a few years of very, very active international interaction and participation. With the change in the government there, what's being set? What foundations are being set to make sure that your successor and the successor of President Lula do keep up this momentum?
The foundations are there already, because what we did in these years, and of course what Brazil is, I mean, what Brazil did in economic sphere, in terms of social justice, in terms of care for environment, all these things, apart from our capacity for dialogue, have shown, all these things have shown themselves already. And I believe the foundations are there already, so I'm very sure that the successor of President Lula and my successor will be able to continue on the same path.
Now, you're in Washington, D.C., being recognized by Foreign Policy magazine as one of its 100 global thinkers. Congratulations on that. You're number 6 on the list. What happens next for you? What role can you continue to play in Brazil's movement forward internationally?
I'll try to become number 5.
I'll
think more and act less and think more.
Do you see a role, though? Because, of course, with the experience you have and the connections you've built,
well, that's not up for me to say. Of course, the only concrete plan I have right now is to lecture in the Rio de Janeiro University, and that I think it's fun enough. I mean, to reflect on what I have done in these years together with President Lula, I mean, under his inspiration. But of course, if something appears, I will consider. But I'm not running for anything.
Well,
I can tell you.
You have a few weeks left. Any loose ends to tie up?
Sorry?
With a few weeks left, do you have any loose ends to tie up?
No, not loose ends, I would say, but there are always things to be done. For instance, we'll be chairing this summit of Mercosur, and of course Mercosur is the South American integration, part of South American integration, right. And there are other things that relate to that aspect. We're going to sign a very important agreement, which we hope serves as inspiration for the rest of the world, which is an agreement of not exactly free trade, but of reducing barriers, a preferential trade agreement among developing countries, involving 15 or so countries. It has a very complicated name that I won't need to tell you now, but this is a good inspiration to see if the rich countries also liberalize their trade.
So there's no escape, it's a packed diary right up to the end.
I'm going there, to the end. That will be until the very end of the year.
Minister Celso Amorim, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Really.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified on upcoming topics, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, the psychology of procrastination. It's an impulse we've all had to fight, but what are the real reasons for and the costs of putting things off for another day? And how do we stop ourselves from procrastinating? I'll speak to 2 academics who specialize in procrastination studies. Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.